Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Devops.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great event on tap, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for our speaker, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your question, and we will try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. Also, at the end of today's webinar, we are going to be doing a drawing for 6 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 6 lucky winners. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is the Security Phoenix, a modern approach to DevSecOps focus on people. Our speaker today is Francesco Cipollone, who is head of Cloud Security Allowance and director of NSC 42. Francesco, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Aline, and thank you for the warm introduction. And yeah, my name is always absolutely complicated to nominate. That's why I have a very short Twitter handle, FrankSec42, for who wants to follow. But Perfect. First of all, I'd like to say it's an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you here. Usually we do these a conference. It's a weird environment to do that over the video. I modified some of the part of the presentation to be more video friendly, like let's ask a question and everybody raise a hand. Well, I can't really see. So we're gonna do a poll in a few minutes to gauge who is in the room and what part of the job you are. But without further ado, first of all, Charlene, thank you, White Source and Devops.com for organizing this conference. I'm very passionate about giving back to the community, sharing security knowledge. I do this because it's my passion and I like the feedback from people. So I try to do this as interactive as possible. Please hit me with as many questions as you can so that we can explore that at the very end.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to put myself on mute and take myself off camera so you can get right to your presentation. I don't want to stay here if I want you to do your thing. So.
So first of all, I like to ask a very rhetorical question, that is, do you actually know what a Phoenix is and how it relates to DevOps? And I asked myself, what is a cool logo that we can brand the application security transformation that is focused on people? And Phoenix came to my mind for a specific reason. It's first of all a very cool logo. It's a fiery bird, but it's a bird that reborns for its own ashes, and is a very good representation of what DevSecOps is. It's an evolution of DevOps. From DevOps ashes, we reborn about DevSecOps, and we're going to see that why in the presentation of today. But I'm going to ask you a trivia that you can answer at the very end of the presentation. That is, can you figure out the number 42? What is the fundamental question that you answer to? And if you're thinking the hijacker guide for the galaxy, you're probably on the right track. But we're going to explore that at the end of the presentation. If you haven't had the chance to think about what that number is, I'm gonna give you the answer. So it's my trick to say, stick around till the end of the presentation. But without further ado, let's go on. My clicker is just falling asleep. So we're going to explore today a little bit about the background, about me, and the context of why it's so important to have a maturity matrix and an evolution of maturity matrix. We're going to see the breaches around application security or security breaches, the visibility problem and the traceability problem. All this will prepare you and the context to the Security Phoenix. That is an application security program, a training, and a transformation program. This presentation is effectively distills the knowledge that we gather from many clients, as well as the training that we do, and is a 3-day training, so we're going to cover several aspects, but I want to give you the best of the knowledge of these 3 days training and the information that we gather from the clients. So a little bit about myself. As Charlene kindly introduced me, I'm Francesco Cipollone. I'm the founder of NSC42, or also Nimble Security Consultancy. I'm a former CISO, I'm an advisor and a cloud expert. I've been speaking about application security extensively about everywhere. The last talk of this one was actually in AppSec Cali, in sunny California. We are in rainy London today. So maybe not the same context, but absolutely warm to be here with you and sharing my knowledge with all of you. I'm also the chair of the Cloud Security Alliance for UK and Ireland, where we do a lot of research webinar. And we've been helping organizations in various sectors. But if you see the trending, we operate in banking and telco. And I have 2 things that I keep on repeating at every of my presentation. Security is everybody's job. In any organization, we're going to see that security is so important nowadays, but if we don't collaborate together, we're never going to be secure. And my personal mantra is I need to make security cool and frictionless for my customer, that is you guys. But I want to know a little bit more about you. So Charlene, can you trigger up the poll and can you let me know which part of the organization are you from?
Yeah, so the poll should be right up on your screen now. Select which one of these best applies to your job role, AppSec, InfoSec, or development.
Okay, we have 60% development, great. InfoSec, 30%, AppSec, that's great.
Yeah.
It's a very good distribution. Development, that's great, because this talk is specifically for developer to grow the knowledge, to grow the understanding of what is an application security problem, what to demand from your fellow InfoSec people, how to collaborate. So,
all right, I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll now and let your slides get back up on the screen.
Yeah, fantastic. And I can see the poll. So, cool. We have 50% development, 25 InfoSec, 23 AppSec. That's great. That's a great distribution. So, cracking on. What do I usually talk about? Well, securing all the things. A meme, I love meme, but that's usually my job, and that's usually my face when I enter in an organization. Let's secure everything, and then yeah, well, let's identify what to secure. But let's see. And it's always, as a security person, it's always a risk assessment. It's deciding what to prioritize. But what I tend to talk about is a lot about AppSec. I'm passionate about application security, but also about cloud security. And DevSecOps is the element that unite effectively the 2 things, because in cloud security, effectively, we deploy things as code. And if we don't have a good synchronization between DevOps and security, we just publish rubbish in the cloud. And AppSec is absolutely the core thing about how to write secure software and how to involve operation and development and security in one single heart. So we have a lot of development. We have got a lot of InfoSec and AppSec people. I'm going to just give a little bit of background about DevOps. That is fundamentally, I think it was born, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I think it was born around 2009 in the Velocity conference. And John Alsford, I think, mentioned the term in the first time. And it's fundamentally the thing of, in the old world, a lot of developers were just focused on doing their job because they were under pressure to deliver, and then releasing things in operation. The operation were just going crazy and saying, this thing doesn't work in operation. Now, in the DevOps world, people start understanding that the 2 worlds need to collaborate, because there is no point of developer just developing something that doesn't work in operation. And it's not fair for the operation people to blame everything on the developer. And as a security person, it's very traditional that security blame developer for not doing a good job. So it's a good environment where developer, operation, and security all develop empathy for each other. And it's so much of a people people perspective. So when DevOps and security come together, each understand their own problematic and they collaborate to introduce element of security in all the pipeline, that's when DevOps and security, or DevSecOps, actually works. So I'm going to go through some numbers. I'm not going to bore you too much with numbers, but it gives you the context of why application security is important. So why is everybody's job? Why security is everybody's job? My answer is we all get affected by it. And you can see here, I summarized a little bit the recent breaches, or the major recent breaches. There are much more of this over the years. And I tend to ask a very simple question. Can you tell me if you have at least one account in any of these organizations? Because I'm telling you, I was breached 14 times, and you can check if you were breached or if you were in any of these data breaches by checking a very simple website that is Have I Been Pwned? And I'll share at the end of the presentation the website where you can check if your email address have been involved in any of these data breaches. But what I keep on saying is treat your customer data as if it was your own data. So if you don't want to get breached, definitely your customer doesn't want to get breached. And this is the size of the breaches. So in orange, we got some of the ones that were particularly impacting, like Equifax, where social security number and particular personal information like credit check were released. And you can see they're growing and growing and growing. Facebook was a lot, Twitter was a lot, Marriott has been breached a couple of times. And I did a selection of the top 5 breaches, in my opinion, and the reason why we're going to explore in a second. But Capital One has been a particular one because a web application firewall has been misconfigured by an internal individual intentionally. So it was a very good representation of a malicious insider plus misconfiguration. Marriott has been breached twice over the years, one after the other, and was quite a substantial breach where passport and personal information of customer were released due to unpatched things on the web front end. Nintendo was breached of recent by credential stuffing. So try. British Airways was a particular interesting case, even though it's a little bit older. It was a very tricky case where malicious code was inserted inside a library, an open source library that British Airways was using in the client-facing application, in a script that the client was launching where interacting with a website. So they had absolutely almost no possibility to determine that thing at that point in time, unless they did an application security program. So that's why application security is so important. Not to mention Microsoft, Facebook, multiple time, open database exposed over the web, and Facebook has been on the news probably a lot of time because of their misuse of API in the recent election and profiling. So those are my top 8, if you want me to take the links to all the breaches. If it's a misconfiguration, I tend to bump it up, and open source or library injection is becoming more and more common because it's really tricky to determine. And an assessment around determining which OWASP top 10 vulnerability get exploited. Public storage is very, very common, or storage left with open access in public, or no MFA around critical accounts. So this could be a checklist of, am I doing anything of this? Because if I learn from previous breaches, those have been, people have used these things. And Equifax tends to be one of my favorite because they got breached and they knew there was a vulnerability and they slept on it for months. And it took an attacker just a month to exploit them and to extract the information. So it was a very particular and targeted attack. But if it exploited a vulnerability, they were aware. And I think it hit every newspaper on earth, and it becomes a showcase of what not to do on vulnerability management. But we're going to touch on that in a minute. Now, to give you a little bit more context, I tend to say we have two categories of attackers. And I'm going to stress the fact to call them attackers, not hackers, but attackers, criminal, malicious people. So we have the financials, not the financial driven, but the one that are motivated by a cause, like Anonymous, Lizard Squad, or the one that are backed by any specific government, like the Syrian-led army or the Iranian or the North Korean one. Those are people that attack organization for a cause. The ones that are more dangerous, if you want, are the ones that are financially motivated. So attack organization to exfiltrate credit card information, exfiltrate confidential information, or most important, exfiltrate big database of information that then they can sell on the dark web or reuse to attack. And those are mega cards or ReEvil. ReEvil is particularly famous for ransomware. Megacard was the one that attacked British Airways with that specifically injected thing, and they tend to go against credit card information. So those are the people that you need to defend to. And if we talk in numbers, the average cost of a data breach is more or less 3 million. And I give you these numbers because security tend to be very fluff talk sometimes at the board level. So if you need to make the case for security, or if you need to prioritize and make and say why security is important, that number resonates with business people. And if you want to give also a number, every 36 minutes, an application security vulnerability is discovered, and it takes 3 to 15 days to exploit that vulnerability, and 150 to 180 days to fix it in the best case scenario. So the global number of around application security or attacks in general or breaches reach around $5 trillion, the total amount of money lost due to data breaches, and it comes with an average of $150 per record. It varies in the dark web, but that's more or less a good average amount. And I'm gonna, before we crack on application security program or DevSecOps, or also called shift left, the reason, if any, to do shift left or to do security at the very beginning of an application development is one and one only. It costs less to do that, and it costs less pain to do that at the very beginning of a development of an application rather than in production. Up to 30 times less, because you need to do more testing, because you need to do more. You need to be more careful about what you change in production rather than if you are coding, if you are developing, if you are at the very beginning of a development, you have more time, first of all, and more freedom to test things without breaking stuff. So those are the bullet if you want to justify why security is important with your team, with your management team. So use them. So we're gonna see a little bit about application security and Security Phoenix. That is the core of an application security program. But I always gouge and say we need to evolve. And this is the anatomy of Phoenix. So we break it down into secure design, in build and test, or secure build and test, security in operation, education and people, and governance and risk management. Those are the core elements. And as elements, anatomy of a bird, a good application security program need to consider all of them, because as a bird can't fly without a wing, without a tail, without the head. An application security program that doesn't consider people, that doesn't consider governance or build and test or security in development or design is crippled. So we're gonna focus on these three because otherwise we're gonna spend too much time, and this is already a distilled version of a training that we do. So in order to get better at those various areas, we need to know how to measure it, how to evolve, how to get better. So as I said, Security Phoenix revolves around design, build and test, and operation with the support effectively of education, risk management, and governance and oversight. So across these areas, we need to define, we need to assess where we are and define where we want to be. These give us the roadmap or the vision of where we want to be. So how do we do that? Well, we put together a maturity matrix that defines stages and tasks at each stage to do so that you can measure it. And there are a couple of open standards called BSIM and SAM that we map this matrix to, and we kind of try to leverage the good part and the bad part of those open standards in order to define a good maturity matrix that define step by step what you need to do. But it's also key for us because what we tend to do is we tend to focus on what do we measure and how do we measure. So a lot of very ambitious programs tend to say, well, we need to measure DevSecOps around the whole organization. And that doesn't mean anything. So you need to measure things while you progress. There is absolutely no point of measuring how many applications have breached your security SLA if you haven't defined your SLA, right? And things like that. So we build metrics and measurement point built on the back of the various maturity level. And it's absolutely critical that you do so, because then you are pragmatic and you are measuring things in a proper and consistent way. So now back on the problem. The visibility problem is the first problem that you're going to get when assessing and when you're launching your application security program. And I tend to do that, I tend to describe the visibility problem with an analogy. From a security perspective, if you don't have visibility on your environment, it's like walking in a room full of broken glass. You kind of can step forward and check with your foot if you have a specific problem, but you don't know the extent of it. You don't know how big it is, or if it's actually the most important thing to fix. What I tend to suggest is shine a light. Create a good database, create a good aggregation, like a warehouse, of what you have in code. So what are all your Bitbucket or your GitLab or your GitHub or your storage of your code? Define and label them where they are, in which stage. Are they in production? Are they candidate? Are they MVP or VP or P? Viable product or minimum viable product. So have a good catalog, because it's the only way to know for sure and to assess for sure how you are from a security perspective. And then onward, we move to the traceability. And I tend to describe this with an analogy. And we all get hungry, and I like cake, so cake is usually my favorite analogy. But consider application security as is baking a cake. You need to take the recipe. Then you need to put the ingredient together, the libraries, the code, and you aggregate them where you're going to deploy. And then you release the cake. Now, as a security person, assume I'm a health inspector. Assume I need to judge how good your cake is. Well, it's going to be very complicated. I can slice it, I can try it, I can determine if I'm sick, but that's going to take days. Or I can ask, can you show me your manifest, your register, or the design of the cake? What ingredient did you use? And can I check for all of these ingredients if they're rotten or not, if they have a specific vulnerability? So if the code has specific vulnerability, if the libraries that you use have specific vulnerability, that's it. But you need to trace back, because otherwise, if you deploy an application and you don't know what library did you use, what version of library did you use, or what code and where it comes from, there is no way you can sanity check the application. Or there are always ways. Pen testing is the way to say, am I going to be able to break it? But that's very expensive, and you can't do it across the board. So tracing the application, how you put them together, is absolutely critical. So let's explore now the core part of the program and what does mean application security, or shift left, or DevSecOps. So I tend to describe DevSecOps as a traditional streamlined approach. Actually, not DevSecOps, sorry. The traditional approach to security is you have people designing, and then people from a security perspective reviewing it, doing a check. Have you done at least your non-functional requirement or your security requirement? Yes or no? That takes time and delay. Security equal friction in that case. Then developers start building an application, and then security needs to review that application in a certain way. Again, another delay. Then you release an operation, and a specific time as a security people, we need to test. Delays. Security is seen as delay of project. I don't like that perception because security is part of the organization. So what I like to focus is security as a streamlined process and a parallel process. A lot of, for example, the non-functional requirement, the security requirement, the control, call it whatever you want, can be gathered at the very beginning. Can be made, any security people can make a list of the policy and what control do you need to apply, because those are the agreement of the organization on how and what control to use. And we can sanity check that in the design time. In design, I say, if you want to do a security thing in design, is use your controls, first of all, and second, do threat modeling. So define what kind of things can break my code, what kind of things can break my application. That you determine the threat. And if you do one single thing in security during design, threat modeling is key. And I'm not gonna being able to explain a lot about the design time, but we can take question at the very end, or we can talk about it in the training. But let's focus on the build and test part. So the build and test tend to be, how do you check the code while you build it, and how do you test the application while you develop it? So it tend to be, I check the code, I release it, not in production, in testing, I'll test it, but I test it from a testing perspective, from a quality, but also from a security perspective. So we tend to introduce at this stage two specific technology, that is static code analysis, that is checking your code, and I tend to suggest doing static code analysis in two ways. At runtime, while you write your code, so you can spot immediately and fix immediately things or the vulnerabilities. Not very effective, but very, very fast. And then do security test, do static code analysis on your code with a parallel pipeline. So don't insert static code analysis at the very in every release, because what they're gonna cause is an enormous slowdown in your release. That depends on your organization, so it's a risk assessment. But my recommendation tend to be do static code analysis as a parallel pipeline, so you can gauge all your code, the quality of all your code, and then in testing, do testing while you're releasing testing phase, because at that time you have much more time than in production. Because when you want to release your code in production, your product owner probably want to say, well, it goes, and it doesn't want to listen, I need to do security. And if you do continuous testing, then the security team come to you and say, well, have you done security testing? Yeah, show me the result. That's done. That's all the check that needs to be done. So that's important. And you can repurpose some of those tests in production so that your pen test becomes much cheaper. Now, let me explore this SDLC in a much more detailed part. And I don't want you to focus too much on the picture. We're going to go through the picture in the various areas of the presentation. Those are the main building blocks, if you want, of the application security program and how to do it. Application asset register, scanning for vulnerability, visualizing, triaging, remediating, and resolve. Those are the things to keep it in mind. Don't focus too much on the picture right now. We're going to see each part. Now, visualizing vulnerability is cool, but how to manage vulnerability is ultimately the key of a security person, doing risk management, doing vulnerability management. Let me give you a few definitions. A vulnerability can be discovered or is a problem. A vulnerability is fundamentally a problem measured in a certain way. A vulnerability assessment is a point-in-time test of your vulnerability. And I stress the fact it's a point in time. What we want to strive and achieve is a vulnerability management that is an ongoing process of assessing and evaluating which vulnerability to fix. So, well, where a vulnerability assessment leaves you with a gap of problems for a specific span of time that you're not fixing the vulnerability management is an ongoing process, and that's what we should strive. So the pillars for the vulnerability management is this circle, and it's a circle because it's we start somewhere but we never end. So it's fundamentally the pillars that we saw before, is assessing your code, having your asset register of your code and assessing it, then triaging, identifying what is good, what is bad from the static code analysis, from the dynamic code analysis, then deciding what to prioritize, what to fix first, visualizing with graph, with trending, whatever, deciding what to remediate ultimately, so what to fix and what to build, then testing it, and then starting all over again, because your posture will be changed at that point in time. So that graph can be turned into something actionable with the A, B, C, and D of application security. Sorry, I had to introduce the D. I couldn't compress it into A, B, and C, unfortunately. But it's fundamentally identify, having a good asset register, having an assessment of your code, and then visualizing the number of vulnerabilities that come from that assessment, and decide what to fix, respond, and recover. So A, B, C, and D. We're going to see this slide again later. But it is to give you a context that what we're trying to do here is not point in time, is continuous. As CI/CD keeps on saying, continuous integration, continuous development, we're trying to do continuous security. And a good application security program strive for continuous security. So I kept on saying is an application security based on people. We talked about technology, so let's see about the people. So as I said, identify a good asset register and link that asset register to the people that are developing. So if you want to do a very quick categorization of your assets in terms of code, you can break it down into two: what you develop and what you buy or get from external. So anything that your third party develops, anything that an external people develop, or anything that you buy off the shelf. That could be a library. An open source library is still a purchase. It's for free, but it's still a purchase. So something that you acquire externally, and something that your people externally from your organization acquire. So let's see how to relate those things to people. So there are certain ways, and this is just an example on how to relate code to static code analysis repository to people. So we kind of came about a number of Git commands that we string together to have effectively all the email address of people to then relate to which team they belong to, and to relate those teams to the result of the code repository. So we had the code, the people, the team, and the code repository. So we could relate effectively what vulnerabilities were linked to which team, and hence we could measure if a team was going better or worse at security, because measurement are key. And then we could spend more time with those groups on why are you doing buffer overflow? Let's do a recap of buffer overflow. Or why are we seeing in your code cross-site scripting? And we could do target education based on these numbers. But also we can set target and say, well, we're not going to touch you as a team if you're constantly decreasing your number of vulnerabilities. But we can only do that if we relate the result of the static code analysis, or the result of the tool, to the people. So if we want to summarize what to do in during build and test, I'll say do static code analysis, do dependency check or library dependency check. White source is a very good tool that we evaluate in the past to do static code analysis. Open source library check. Sneak is another one. There are tons. Sonatype is another one. There are tons available that are linked to effectively the repository of this open source. That can give you a good impression. Dust is a black box testing that you can do in testing and in production. So that's the stage of the scanning for vulnerabilities. And where should you do those things? So we tend to say, do that in development and do that in production, but keep the production and the development as two separate dashboards for one specific reason only. A vulnerability that you have in production can be exploited probably almost immediately, because it's almost immediately visible. Normally in development, those vulnerabilities tend to be shielded from external. It's a false sense of security, but probably you there. So we saw the scanning. Now let's see the visualization element of once you've done the scan. How do you display those things, and how do you display those dashboards? So we developed a bunch of scripts that extracted, for example, information about vulnerabilities from the static code analysis tool, the library scanner, or the dust. We dumped them in a Postgres database and visualized it with a Grafana dashboard. Simple script. This is an example of how those Grafana was looking like. So if you see the dots, specify when a specific scan was done, and then you can see the trending. So this is just an example. But what we did with the team is we given a license to the team, and we say, if you are constantly under this threshold, you can release in production, no problem, no security check. But if you are above for a specific amount of time, then we take away that license. That's what we said. That's why I said security is a matter of trust and trust in the development. And this is a very powerful concept, because security is not anymore in the way, it's an agreement with security. Now, once you have the vulnerabilities, I tend to say, don't get scared and don't get used by the tool. So a lot of time when you run this static code analysis, your dynamic code analysis, they're not perfect. Don't get used by the tool. Take the result of the code scanning with a pinch of salt. Analyze what is possible, what is not possible. If it tells you that a specific method has a vulnerability and you haven't called that method at all, that's a false positive. So evaluate each single result if it's a false positive or not. And if you do any triaging of vulnerability, that's it. That's the first step. And triaging is an evolution. So the more you get experience with taking those vulnerability into something pragmatic, the better you get at triaging. So you start by just saying, is a false positive or not, to where it is deployed, how important is my application, and things like that. So this is one of the metrics, one of the maturity model that we use around triaging. Do not do everything at one go. If you're not mature enough as a team, you're not going to do super context-aware triaging, because you're starting there. There is no point of running where you still haven't started walking. So pragmatism and being pragmatic. And I keep on saying the trust and verify, the giving developer the license is absolute key. So people first, and spend time with people if you're on security team. So if you want to go fast on an application security program, trust your people, but verify that they're doing the scanning. Make sure they have a license, kind of license to operate, and they know exactly the limit. And a way to do it, we created, for example, for one of our clients, an aggregator of, we took the result of the learning management system. We took the result of how many use stories and how many fixed stories, so vulnerability stories they were maintaining, and if they were respecting a certain threshold. And we took a snapshot of how many security vulnerability they had over a period of time. We automate all of them, and we given them an automated break switch for their pipeline. So that is how you do trust in an automated way, and you don't just break the pipeline for the sake of it. And this is just an example of how you apply that concept of license to operate and trust. Now, I don't have a lot of time, but specifically on the education, I want to spend a little bit of time. I mentioned before craft training based on the scanner's faults, because then you can decide, okay, this team is lacking from a security perspective. You can decide this team is lacking expertise on this, or has done a training on cross-site scripting, but I see a lot of cross-site scripting in their code, so they're either not paying enough attention or they don't remember the training. It's pointless to send the developer on a 4-day training course based on cross-site scripting if they're not having cross-site scripting or buffer overflow. You're gonna kill the developer. So do development on the job, or training on the job. Spend some time with the developer as a security person, and that's what we do in our application security training. So we spend time with the developer and we focus on what is the problem at hand. And it's harder, but it delivers much more result. And if anything, make security entertaining. Do capture the flag internally and give rewards, because it costs you less than a bug bounty program. So I want to recap with a couple of things. So the maturity model is absolutely key, because you can define step, and we saw the step. So static code analysis, SLAs, or breaking the pipeline is, for example, a maturity level 3, or automating fuzzing, library testing, the threshold, and those things are maturity 5, for example. And if you see the metrics, build versus fix, if you don't have an automated way to measure how many use stories versus how many vulnerability stories are you fixing, there is no way to measure it. There is no point of measuring it or demanding to measure it. If you haven't done your code scanning and the results are not included inside Jira, there is absolutely no point of imposing draconian SLAs like critical vulnerability need to be fixed in 1 day. How can you measure it? So measure things when you can have data point and you can visualize. So I stress a lot on the visualization. As a recap, A, B, C, and D of application security, that should be effectively the application security model. So identify, have a good asset register of the library and the code and where those things are built in production. Assess at least once per week or once per month or once per sprint the code itself and have a good line of posture. Visualize things and define KCI or key metrics indication and KPI, key people indicator for what you measure. So how many vulnerability you need to have in a quarter in order to be considered a good team, or how many vulnerability per sprint you need to have, or how many vulnerability versus how many use stories you need to fix every sprint. Those are the metrics that you need to establish and supplement them with visualization. And then effectively to response and recover. That is the most important part of a vulnerability management program. That is effectively looking at the vulnerability and deciding which vulnerability to fix in this particular sprint. And if you have them in Jira, it's just one story versus another stories. If you are in a developer world, you work probably 90% of the time on a ticketing system like Jira. So you have what you need to fix and what you need to fix from the testing, from the security testing. So use Jira as your best friend. And Jira has labels, so it's really easy to detect where something is linked to a production environment or something is linked to a development environment. Recap, security is everybody's job. It's not, as a security person, I don't dump every security task on a project manager or on a developer person. It's a common job. So maturity model is key to measure success and measurement towards a goal, towards a vision. Trust your team, trust your developer, because they are effectively the boundaries and they are your extended security team. I dream of a world where I don't have to talk with anybody. No, actually, no, it's not true. It's boring. But as a security person, I tend to go in organization, and as a team, we tend to be very, very stretched because there are tons of development teams. We're very tiny. So it's better if all the development team learn a little bit and then ask us the hard question. Identify the assets where they are in development and in production. Do vulnerability management. Prioritize vulnerability and make it as part of your DNA. There is no point of doing an assessment and then say, we're secure. We're going to rest. We're going to remain secure for the rest, maybe 1 day or 3 days. Automation is key. So all these elements that we saw are triggered by automation. License to operate is a good example of automation. Breaking the pipeline is a good measurement of automation. Automating this code scanning, launching them from a pipeline is absolutely key. Don't do the boring stuff. Let the machine do the boring stuff. Let us use our brain to do what's important. So the intelligence part, the correlation, what our human brain is great to do and what the machine is dumb to do. And again, do data-driven education. Before I close off, first of all, we don't do just AppSec, we do cloud security a lot, we do training, we do coaching on the job, and we do strategy work. So get in touch with us and get in touch with me, ping me if you need help in any kind of environment. We are flexible and want to help you because that's our passion. Those are my contacts. If you take a screenshot or a snapshot with your phone, you're gonna get them on your phone. Otherwise, you can contact me on www.nsc42.co.uk. That's our website, or on LinkedIn, or you can drop an email to communication@nsc42.co.uk. Because I love sharing and conference are never enough, I have a podcast where we talk a lot about application security. The very first podcast of the second season has application security talk and cloud security talk. We had a previous season, and I'm going to wrap up in a second. And we have an award coming up, so be ready to listen. But I'm going to open the floor to question and answer. And we have tons of questions.
We have so many questions. I can't believe how many questions. They started coming in fast and furious. So let's go ahead and dive in. But before we do, even though we have a ton of questions, there's still time, guys. If you do have a question, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit it. We'll try to get to it. We'll do our best.
First of all, I know that I went power through, so it's a lot of information to get through. So I thank you so much and specifically the development environment, because showing up and learning about security is my mission, and teaching you guys about security is my mission in life. And I do it with passion because I believe that all together we can make this world a little bit more secure. But if we don't collaborate, and I really appreciate you doing that in this your own spare time. So
excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, let's dive right into the questions and get to as many as we can. Here's the first one. What are the key security aspects that need to be considered while moving across the environments for a given application?
Okay, so maybe let me see if I can re-jump on this, because this is actually a good slide to talk through. So one thing that we can do at the very beginning could be having NFR, having patterns. And if security does anything at the very beginning of the pipeline of the design phase, that's it. So distill all your regulation, make into control, make into statement that can be implemented immediately, or policies. Policies are the agreement from the organization. If you say a password can't be longer than 8 characters, it needs to contain that, that's a crystallized things that every single application needs to do. If we say that all the keys needs to be in one specific place, that's a clear statement. So that will make you the list of all the application security control that you need to do. Now, we talked a little bit about design time. We need to do threat modeling. I haven't spent a lot of time on threat modeling, but there will be a podcast coming out discussing for 1 hour with the creator of threat modeling, Adam Shorshak. So you can hear more about that, or you can subscribe to our mailing list to know a little bit more. Build and test, again, static code analysis at runtime while you write code. Unfortunately, the majority of static code analysis are commercial. I think GitHub or GitLab is proposing to introduce something integrated in the repository. Testing over the time, even if you do a number of battery of testing and use your QA team to do the testing from a security perspective, just make sure that you have at least some security testing. That could be testing the OWASP top 10 or things like that.
All right, so, great. Perfect. We're about 11 minutes to the top of the hour. I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions, so let's keep going on. During the development phase, other than SAST and DAST, what can be adopted? I'm assuming for security.
Library. Open source libraries is the key vector. And I'm not talking because I'm biased, but white source is here. And jokes aside, dependency check. There is an OWASP library tool that doesn't do a great job, but it does something that is called dependency checker. And it checks for open source library issues. The commercial tool have a free version or have a commercial tier, but it tells you what vulnerability are in production, and you can use those as proxy. So you can say libraries that are open source and have these vulnerabilities don't go in production or can't be used as code. So that's another check other than SAST and DAST.
All
Another
right.
question?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. What Linux distro would you prefer while dealing with the security aspect in an organization? Kali or another?
Kali is a very good example. Yeah, Kali is a good example of testing, but a distro doesn't necessarily, I mean, Kali is great because it has a lot of tool to test things and has Metaexploit. So there is tons of things that you can use, but there is OWASP tool. So if you don't know OWASP, have a look because it has tons of materials and open source small micro things that can help you. Like NetTacker is a very good tool to test against open vulnerabilities and doing dynamic testing. Hopefully
Excellent.
I answer your question.
Yeah. Okay, I have something here. It's actually more of a statement, but I think it's a conversation starter. Interested to know, a lot of engineers I work with do not like the term DevSecOps. What do you have to say about that?
And it's the truest thing because I enter and I say, I never say I'm a DevSecOps person. I am saying I'm here to serve you guys. So nobody likes DevSecOps because nobody likes their work to build it. I don't like anybody browsing on my shoulder and say, you did wrong, Dad. It's absolutely worse. So don't introduce DevSecOps. Introduce, I'm here to help you guys do more secure code. So it's a completely shift of mindset.
So it's
making
getting,
it pragmatic.
yeah, and it's also kind of, you're not labeling it so that somebody can't move beyond that label. So
Exactly.
I like that
So
idea.
kill the label, kill the terms. We don't do DevSecOps. We don't do these things. We are here to help people doing more secure stuff.
We're here to help, folks. We're here to help. Okay, next question. Let's see. No question on the material today, except you keep mentioning logging of fixes or testing, but you don't say whether the logs are temporary, permanent, or for the dev team only, and then testing team. So I guess, are they temporary, are they permanent, and who are they for, and what are they being used for, and all that good stuff?
It depends. There are lenses for all the parts of the organization. And thank you for the question. It's actually a great question. So it depends how long you want to measure your team, your organization. So it could be a point in time, it could be 6 months, it could be a year. Generally speaking, 6 months to a year give you a good perspective. Of course, you can't keep all the information. And that's why it's great to have checkpoint at a specific point in time, like at 6 months, I see the maturity of an organization, how good we're doing, and it's a snapshot of the organization. And that's why visualization is absolutely key, because it's very complicated to remember how many vulnerabilities were in that application. Well, if you saw that in a graph and you say, over this time is cool, we haven't touched security, but then we had a spike of new vulnerability and then we fixed them, or we drop the library. So you can see, you can have that feedback immediately. So it doesn't matter that graphics are good and CLI is cool for engineers. Engineers like also to see, because visualizing vulnerability or the trending gives them some feeling of, maybe we shouldn't use that library. Maybe we should drop that piece of code. I hope I answered your question.
All right, great. We're about 6 minutes to the top of the hour. I think we have time for one more question. And there's one here that is a little involved, and you may want to take it offline, but I'll go ahead and throw it out there. My question is, to whom I direct a confidentiality disclosure in an app that has a parent who's the owner of the app and a child with a development problem who's the user of the app? The app is designed to interact with a child or teen that has suffered a traumatic experience, and that the user may disclose names or times that the data collector, may receive from the app. So I guess it's about confidentiality agreements.
That's a very delicate question. I'd like to keep that offline. So get in touch with me on LinkedIn. I tend to make time for all of you guys, so I dedicate half an hour. So happy to jump on a call to help you advise. It's a very delicate question, and it involves regulation, it involves minor, it depends. We're going to discuss for all hours.
Yeah, you're right,
So,
right. That's not
I'm
a
not
quick
dodging the
answer.
question. I'm not dodging the question, so I'm happy to take it offline and reach out to me, schedule a call, www.nec42.co.uk. You have an automatic scheduler of the call. Happy to take it on.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, well, we're about 5 minutes to the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and close out the question and answer period of today's webinar. If we didn't get to your question, I think we got to all of them, but if we didn't, I apologize. But please know that Francesco will be getting a copy of all of the questions that were asked, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline, him or somebody from his organization. Also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again, you will have the opportunity to do so. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. The webinar is also going to be living on the devops.com website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to devops.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Also at the top.
We forgot one thing.
Sure, what?
One thing, the 42, the meaning of the 42.
Well, I know it. I think I know what it is.
Okay,
I put it in
please,
the chat
please
to
disclose
you.
it to everybody. No, please disclose to everybody. It's usually my thing. Yeah,
It is the answer to life, the universe, and everything.
Yes, and that's what we are. We're here to reply to every single possible question, but also wiki.
Yes, actually I saw NSC 42 and I said, yep, life, the universe, and everything.
I gotcha.
So anyway, well, let's see. I completely lost my train of thought. We got to do the Amazon gift cards now. So without further ado, let's do that's all right. We'll do the drawing for the 6 Amazon gift cards. Okay, our winners today are, let's see, first winner is Christine W. Our second winner is Dan K. Our third winner is Kieran K. Our fourth winner is Mario C. Our fifth winner is Sean with an AWN M. And our final winner today is Pete T. Congratulations to all of you. We'll be following up with you offline via email to get your Amazon gift card over to you. So please check your inbox. If it's not there, please check your spam folder because it might be there. So Francesco, thank you very much for such a great presentation. Lots of good stuff, lots of fun. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much for sharing my evening with you, your evening with me.
All right, all right. And I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.
Stay safe. Goodbye.